Assessment should be done to answer a question. Often assessment is done because it's required by law or regulation that we do this assessment once a year or once every 3 years on this person. And often it's a waste of time. For example, my son is in his home and he's doing very well. All his needs are being met. So to do an assessment is a waste of everybody's time because we already feel like everything is going well. So an assessment needs to answer a question. It can answer questions such as, who is this person? What are the things this person likes, dislikes? What are their skills and needs? It can look at things like, what are the priorities for helping this person's skills get better, helping them enhance their skills? It can look at things like, what kind of support is needed to help this person live and work in the community? What kind of support is needed in school to help them learn skills, academic skills? And it can also ask things like, how can we design those supports so that the person can have the life they want? These are some global helpful questions that don't get at things like, what is this person's IQ? Or how well can this person spell? These are kind of useless for our kids, especially with all of the sensory impairments. And so to do assessment for its own sake is not a good idea. You want to have specific questions that you want to answer. And the more those questions are geared toward helping a person live an independent life in the community, the better. So you want to use assessment instruments that are really useful, that are comprehensive and global, and are person-oriented. You want to work with the person and their family, depending on their age, to get the richest information you can. One of the assessment instruments we can use for this to answer the question, who is this person, especially with young children, is called Home Talk, and there's a link to this in the slide. This is published by Design to Learn in Oregon in the United States. It's a free instrument for anyone. You can download and print it out. Home Talk was designed by researchers and parents all working together to figure out what are the most helpful ways of asking these questions. What are the most helpful questions to ask? And what Home Talk does is it interviews the parent, especially of young children, in depth to provide a broad picture of the child's skills, special interests, and personality. So it really answers that question, who is this person, without going into a bunch of individualized, standardized assessments that just aren't necessary and aren't going to tell you anything. It tells you about what the parent's priorities are for the child. It gives you some culture of the family. It tells you about the child's communication skills. And it really gives you kind of a broad global picture of the individual. The next question we talked about was, what are priorities for enhancing this person's skills? Often with children with charge syndrome, there are so many things going on that it's really difficult for a school or an adult team to figure out what is the most important thing to work on. I know for myself as a school psychologist, I looked at my son and I thought, oh my goodness, there are so many things he needs help with. How do we decide which ones should be his goals and objectives for this school year, or even at home? And it was very overwhelming. So for kids, especially with complex and disorders and disabilities, it's really hard to decide what's most important. So we have an instrument called Coach 3, which stands for Choosing Options and Accommodations for Children, and it's the 3rd edition. We've been using it for a while now, and I will link that as well. This one is not free. And Coach is a booklet that gives you a series of questions in each of a bunch of domains for parents and professionals to work on together. It can be done through interview with the parent, or the parent can help work with the professionals in a group and work on figuring all of these things out. So each domain has a series of questions, and it asks the parents, which of these series of questions, which of these series of items do we want to work on for our child? Which ones are necessary? And so the parent will help the professionals, and you go through and you check them all off. And you may find 10 things in each domain that need to be worked on. So communication, physical, occupational, fine motor skills, social skills, academic skills, all of these things. You go through and you check off the numbers of items that you want worked on. This person needs, absolutely. Then the team and the parent come together and they work on prioritizing those needs. So within each domain, the parent, the family, the individual, and the team work on what are the top 3 things in this domain out of maybe the 10 you checked off that you want to work on first. And then you draw it even further. When you get those list of 3 things in every domain, you go through the whole list and you decide which of these, choose 10 of this total number that are the most important to work on today, right now, this year. It doesn't mean you're going to abandon any of the others. You keep those in a record and you may work on them on the side because now everybody knows what the priorities are. But those are the 10 things or 8 things or 6 things that you decide to make formal goals and objectives for the year. It's an extremely helpful way to whittle down, to funnel down into the things that are most important priorities for school and for adult life. In the United States, we widely use a scale called the Supports Intensity Scale, and I'll link it here in the slides. The Supports Intensity Scale is really a good instrument because it was normed on and standardized on people with intellectual disabilities. So unlike the WISC and some of these other IQ tests, which are normed on people without disabilities, this one actually was norm referenced on more than 1,300 people. And so it really is representative of people with disabilities. What it does is it's done through interview by a trained person, and you are asked a series of questions about how much support someone needs for individual things. So for example, how much support does your individual person need for walking? And then it will give you a scale such as total support, almost total support, all the way down to no support needed at all. And then that's given a number. And so in the end, you'll have a number that shows how much support is needed for physical assistance and those kinds of things. It looks at behavior. It looks at how much support is needed, how much time is needed for the support, how much intensity is needed for the support. And it looks at areas of home living in the community and neighborhood, how much support is needed for school participation, how much is needed for learning at school, health and safety support, social activities, and also how much support is needed for this person to be able to advocate for themselves. There is an adult version and a child version. The adult version looks at all of these things that I've just talked about, and the child version looks at things that are more geared toward children and even the family and how much support the family needs. What comes out of this is a score, but also some very rich information that people can look at individually to see how much support this person needs to live in their home community, to work in their home community, to go to school in their home community. So the score is used in an interesting way, though. The score is used in the United States to determine how much funding the person will get for that support. So it's kind of been convoluted and used in a strange way, but it has really enhanced the amount of support people have gotten, people with disabilities. For example, my son was given the Supports Intensity Scale a few years ago and actually from this received a larger budget than he was receiving. So it does a good job of advocating for the support that people really need to live in their communities. So one of the great things about the Supports Intensity Scale as an adjunct to these other kinds of assessments is that it looks specifically at transition for adults. And because transition for adults from school into community living and work is so difficult, and because at least in the United States, school personnel don't want to be responsible completely or sign their name that this transition will happen this way, because once the child leaves school, it's out of their hands and they don't have any control. So if you bring everybody together around the table, the transition team, the adult team, the school team, and everyone works on the Supports Intensity Scale together, as well as these other things, it really tells the professionals what is needed to be put into place. And so it takes the guessing away from the transition process. So often when we're taking our children through transition process into adult living, no one knows what to do. In the United States, the two agencies, the child agencies and the adult agencies, don't really communicate well with each other. And they're very different in terms of the supports that they provide. The school agencies are mandated by law they must give these supports. But the adult agencies are not mandated. You can get them through eligibility, but everyone doesn't know that, and everyone doesn't know what's available. So the supports intensity scale, everyone come around the table and decide what's needed, and then they can work with the agencies that they need to get the services that are necessary. The last question I talked about as a global question for assessment is, how can we design supports so the person can have the life they want? So we know who the person is, we know what supports they need. We've been working on goals and objectives in school. There's a really powerful tool called person-centered planning, and it's a process that is very global. It includes people with disabilities into natural environments, and it brings together people who love the person and care about the person to help them plan. If you think about your own life, if you were stuck in, maybe a place where you couldn't find the job you wanted, or maybe your romantic life was unsatisfactory, or say someone has a spouse who just died and they don't know how to put their life back together. If you think about yourself and having all of your friends and family that love you so much and that you feel supported by come together and brainstorm about ways that it could help you along with you, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? At the same time, it can be very daunting to have all these people come around and talk about your life to you. So you have to keep that in mind when doing person-centered planning. You want the person to feel comfortable. So basically, it's a big brainstorming process that helps to connect individuals with disabilities with mainstream society and helps them to realize their life goals. It is meant to push more toward inclusive practices, both in school and in the community. So if we're looking at having a person live in some kind of institutional living, person-centered planning would probably try to move them away from that a little. But it works really well. It's an extremely powerful tool. So what's important about it is that it's person-centered. The individual is given the power to decide what they want, how they want it to happen, and then those around them help build that dream under them. It helps them to have a more proactive role, have control in their lives, which is important for all of us. We should all be able to make decisions about our lives. Person-centered planning is also very positive. It helps people to be defined by their strengths, by their desires, their dreams, instead of looking at their weaknesses, which so often assessments look at. So this person can't walk. What can we do to help them walk? Is looking at a weakness instead of saying, this person is a wheelchair user and therefore needs the support to use their wheelchair and needs to have places that have ramps where they live. So we look at it positively. We put the person in charge of defining the direction for their lives and not on the systems that are set up to serve them. So often, at least where I live, the child comes out of high school and automatically is put into a service system because that's just where everybody goes. Everybody goes to the sheltered workshop and works. And I've known individuals who have been extremely unhappy with that situation, had a person-centered plan, and then found employment in other areas of the community that was individualized and where they felt supported. So person-centered planning plans with the person and not for them. So it's not a bunch of professionals saying you have to do this, which is so much of what happens in schools. We plan with them. We come up with ways to get what they need, what they dream about, what they want in their lives. It starts with their abilities and interests. It's comfortable for them and non-threatening, and it should be a celebration of life for them. You hear from the individual first. The person gets to have the biggest say, or their family if there's someone who is unable to communicate their needs and dreams. It's non-threatening. So in that sense, the person or their family gets to invite who they want at the person-centered planning meeting. I've known, I think I talked about this earlier, didn't I? People who had people they didn't want to invite. I think I talked about that earlier, so edit that out. It's important to have purse strings people there if you can. So people, administrators, people who have the ability to make decisions about what agencies will be involved and how the supports will be put together. But it gives everybody a better understanding of the person. It gets everyone on the same page. I've been in certain in-person centered planning meetings and facilitated them where we've had administrators there who were very negative toward what was going on. They didn't understand the process. They were a little frightened. They didn't know what they were going to be asked to do. But by the end, they were fully on board, celebrating with the person, giving them the supports they needed. So it's this really great brainstorming process that helps bring everyone together. It's not about assessments and scores, but it's about the person and their immediate and long-term future. You need to have a really good facilitator to do person-centered planning. You want somebody who is trained in this and understands all the questions that need to be gone through, and also understands how to facilitate a group process so that everyone gets their voice heard, no one feels stepped on, everyone is respecting the individual. Some of the questions that are asked in a person-centered planning include, what is this person's history? The family or the individual talk about the things in their history that they want everyone to know. If you think about it, you bring your child to school at 5 years old, and there's 5 years of history back there. And with a child with Charge syndrome, that's a lot of information. All the illnesses and surgeries a lot of these kids have been through. The school personnel don't know about any of that. And this is a way to give them all of that history so they understand where the family and the person is coming from. What are the person's dreams? What do they want for their life? If they could plan their perfect future, what would it look like? And the individual and the people around them will talk about what they dream for the person. Even some of the professionals can say things like, I dream that he will talk someday, or I dream that someday she'll be able to chew food and not have a G-tube anymore. And that's a very valid dream. No dreams are too big or too small. And so it's brainstorming. There's no naysaying of anything anybody says. Everything gets put out on this large paper. Then we talk about the fears of the person or their nightmares. And a lot of times these are really scary. They can be things like, I'm afraid my child will be put in an institution. I'm afraid my child will die. I'm afraid I'll die and my child won't have the supports they need. These can be really scary things to think about. And for the rest of the people around the person to hear that is really important, because then they, as a circle of support for this individual, can go to lengths to make sure these things don't happen. Then we get to, who is this person? And when we ask the question, who is this person, we're asking for one word, phrases that describe the person in a celebratory manner. So for instance, you may say, this person is an advocate. This person is a singer. This person is someone who likes to exercise. And negatives are typically turned on their head and become positives. So for instance, my son likes to explore things with his mouth. And so someone put on there that he's a licker, you know, and that's okay. It was funny. Everyone laughed. It's a celebratory party-like atmosphere. And as long as it doesn't degrade the person where they're embarrassed, it's okay to do that. Then we look at the person's strengths, gifts, and talents. These are really, really important for building the future. I just worked on a person-centered plan with a young man, and one of the things that we talked about that had never really been talked about in his school before was that he loved to sing. He sings constantly. And at the school, there is a piano bar in the cafeteria. So one of the things that came out of the person-centered plan is that he could go in there and sing with the other student who plays the piano. There's another student who has disabilities who plays the piano, and they could work together to do that. And that was really interesting to him. He loved that idea because he loves to sing. And you know, who knows, that could lead to some employment for him later. So that's something that would have been completely missed without the person-centered planning process. Finally, we look at, what are the needs? What does this person need in order to achieve their dreams and avoid their fears? And so the group around, including the person, will talk about these. These become much more concrete, like this person needs a talking board. This person needs support to live in their own home. This person needs to work on transition skills in terms of going out to an airport to meet people where he can work at an airport late, so he can work at an airport later because that's one of his dreams. So from the needs, then you build an action plan, and the action plan, you could see the brainstorming process is coming from very large and then it's whittling down to very small. And the action plan will actually have things in it that people in the group will be responsible for. So for instance, the action plan may say, Cindy will take the individual to the piano bar to talk to the other individual and talk about how they can work together. And it will happen within the next month. And the action plan may say, John will assist the person to get a trip out to the airport to talk about the kinds of jobs they might have there that this person can do. And this will happen in the next 3 weeks. And so the action plan is very concrete. It looks at the priorities that the group has come up with for needs, and it talks about when it will happen, who will assist with it, and what it is that's going to happen. So you have a very clear, it's almost like in a goals and objectives page for the group to assist the person. So person-centered planning isn't about making the person better, which so many goals and objectives are. It's about assisting the person to live the life they want to live. And this is helpful for school time, it's helpful for young children, it's helpful for anybody in transition process. And what's really cool about it is it brings the team together in a way that celebrates the individual, and the team really invests, really gets pulled into the process. And then it's important to really revisit that. So you come back together, you decide in the action plan when you're going to come back together and revisit. And the person-centered plan actually then morphs into a circle of support for that individual.